G'day everyone, my name's Cautious Pancake and welcome to an explosive new experimental release, version 1.1, build 14. Actually, it's literally true in this case, as some of the changes for this release are for explosion effects. Specifically, barrels, vehicles, landmines and propane tanks have had additional particle effects added to their explosions. Comparing them to their 1.0 release equivalents, you can see that they've had a little bit of love. Some of them are a little hard to spot, but the landmine I think in particular looks really cool, apart from the weird flash of a rectangle that you can see when it first goes off. None of it's earth-shattering, but it's always nice to see little additions like this being made with every update. Looking at the release notes, there's quite a few additions, changes and fixes in this experimental release. Remember that this isn't in the main release yet, but it is available to play if you don't mind breaking changes and potential issues with mods. After looking through all the items listed, I thought I'd explore a few of them in this video, as they will show some of the things to come before 1.1 goes stable. Probably the biggest and most controversial update in this release, I think, will be the yucca fruit icon. Obviously, I'm kidding. They've just changed the icon to make it more in line with the plants, which is a nice change, but kinda small. Don't worry though, while eating the fruit, it still looks like a wallet or a mouldy old sponge that was used to clean some oil from the garage one time. Another icon change is for the knuckle wraps, which now looks like this. I like this one as well, since it fits a lot better. Probably more important though, the knuckle wraps recipe has changed, and it now requires 6 iron and 20 cloth, whereas in 1.0 it used the same iron, but 2 leather instead of cloth. It's not a huge change, and while more things needing cloth as an ingredient isn't necessarily great, I feel that it's more thematically appropriate. Overall, I don't see it making a huge difference, unless you were already struggling for cloth. This release also includes some new POIs, 6 in fact. Only one of them is a questable POI, that's Uncle Ray's Supermarket, also known as Countrytown Business 15. It's a tier 3 POI that looks like it should be fun to explore. The other 5 new buildings are Downtown Remnant Villas, which are the new type of POIs that were introduced in 1.0 to help keep the frame rates of cities down, as well as providing some additional flavour and emptier buildings to explore, which I think overall makes the world feel more full rather than having just the same old questable buildings, and allows the Fun Pimps to add more buildings without having to make each one of them a more complicated and specific questable location. Out of all of these, I think my favourite is the Flavour Corner, which features 2 of the 5 essential food groups. This release sees 2 updates to harvest challenges, the first being for harvesting polymer. In this one, various window lines have been modified so that they now count towards the challenge, but when you're tracking the challenge objectives, they won't show just because there are so many of them out in the world. The other change for harvest challenges is for gathering honey. In this case, POI stumps, which previously didn't count towards the total, will now count. My favourite location for this will now be at the honey farms, which is always worth harvesting the tree stumps if you need a little bit of honey. For those that watch my channel regularly, you'll know that I'm not a huge fan of the auger in 1.0. Well, it looks like the Fun Pimps are listening and have given both the auger and chainsaw a 20% buff to harvest quantity. You can see that running a 1.0 and 1.1 version side by side on a level 1 character with no bonuses, there's a flat 20% increase from 50 to 60 ore harvested, which doesn't sound like much there, but when you're at an end game setup, 20% increase in harvest is going to add an extra 7,000 or so ore over a 5-minute run, based on a fully kitted out tier 6 with all of the gear and mods. That's certainly nothing to be sneezed at, and I think it's a good sign that the devs are listening and reviewing the stats to add a little balance as we move through the post 1.0 releases. With this change, I think the augers will be viable again for top tier mining. They still have their drawbacks, but now it's a more interesting choice to take the extra screamers and noise of the auger versus the lower yield of the pick. The electrician magazines have seen some changes in this release as well. The basic electricity levels are the same, but they've moved the sensor level down 5 books so you can start them at 45. Battery banks and power doors are now also available much earlier at 55 instead of 75, which is a great change that I suspect a lot of people have been asking for, so that the power doors can be used in bases much earlier on. In the current 1.0 release, you have to wait a long time to get them involved. The battery crafting over time all the way up from 55 to 100 seems like a good fit to me, since you can still loot good batteries from salvaging. These changes to electrician are interesting when you look at it in combination with one of the other changes to solar cell quantity from traders. I take this to mean that the solar cells now should be more available and in better qualities than in 1.1 than they were in 1.0, which should mean that it's easier to use more of the interesting items from the electrician book set. And last, but certainly not least, stealth is getting a buff. Well, maybe. See, there's so many changes in 1.1 now for stealth that it's kinda hard to tell just from the release notes if it's actually going to be a buff or not. The most obvious change to stealth is the new colouring of the stealth bar, which shows green when you're undetected and yellow when you've been detected. That's going to be a bit of a help, but what's not clear is if this has fundamentally changed how to play a stealth character. As one example, even when your stealth meter is less than 100, a zombie that sees you will still trigger immediately like this. Another weird one is that even in a new game currently, walking over trash seems to not change the stealth meter value, but Urban Combat Book 3 still says sneaking over trash will produce sound. You can still hear the trash noise, and that does still seem to trigger response groans from the zombies, but doesn't seem as likely to wake them up. That lines up with one of the changes listed, which is that it improves the player stealth UI to be twice as sensitive to light and only half as sensitive to sound, so if it's darker you can get closer to the zombies than before, and sound won't be as likely to trigger them as much as it used to. There's probably a bunch more testing and balancing to come for stealth, but my gut feel from the quick play that I've had so far is that stealth is slightly stronger than it was before, at least in the early game, and I think my next playthrough is really going to have a strong stealth component just to see how it plays. Oh, and a quick warning, they have buffed the ability for direwolves and bears to see you while stealthing, so raiding them for loot bags is probably not as easy as it used to be. So those are my picks for the notable changes in version 1.1, build 14 experimental, but aren't all of the changes by a long shot. Let me know in the comments below if something else caught your eye, and please leave a like if you found this video useful, and consider subscribing to see more videos like this one. Thanks to my awesome supporters from Patreon, thanks to you for watching this video, and happy sneaking.